My family that were in the AIM program, serving in Mariupol, Ukraine, in Okinawa, Japan, and in Bangkok, Thailand. Michelle and Gary, as you notice, they became husbands and wives. My middle daughter and oldest daughter met their mates in AIM, but they didn't date during AIM. That's against the rules, by the way. They did not date till AIM. They didn't date till they came back. But Gary and Michelle have been missionaries in Thailand for almost 10 years now. And those seeds were planted a long time ago. Of course, we were missionaries in Russia, so missions are very close to our heart. And we are so grateful this morning to have this group. I saw them at Winterfest. I was telling about Jeff coming through. They said, well, we're going to be back in Gatlinburg this next weekend. I said, Corey, y'all could come to Line Area on your way back. They said, we're leaving on Sunday. I said, why don't y'all just stop into Line Area? We could do the flag presentation. And so he kind of did this a little bit, kind of thought for a second. He said, let me get back with you on that. Sure enough, a couple hours later, he called me and said, we're on. So we are so thankful that y'all have come this way. They're traveling. They have a long trip back. We're going to feed them after services this morning. But I want you to be praying for them and praying for this great work. Corey Burns is the director. How long have you been being the director there? 7 years now. Doesn't seem that long. Chris Smith was there forever. And we love him. We love, of course, Pat Schaefer's been 25 years or so that he's been there. And we just love this organization, this group. And Corey's going to come up here and tell us about what's going on with the flag presentation.
Well, good morning. One tidbit that Mitchell didn't mention is I was in AIM back in 1996, and I met Mitchell and Gayla for the first time in Moscow, Russia, because I was an AIM student in Moscow. And so that was our beginnings. And think about this, that I was a 19-year-old boy. I won't even say young man. I'll say I was a 19-year-old boy living in Moscow, Russia, and here I am as the director of AIM. And it reminds me, and we say this to the AIMers all the time, is the only difference between you and me is time. But really, you only get here as if you're being very intentional about the things that you do. We've been on the road raising up workers for the harvest, and I want to share with you a practice that we have in AIM, and hopefully you will choose to adopt this as well. Is there's a passage in Luke chapter 10, verse 2 that says, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send forth workers into the harvest field." And so one of our practices in AIM is every day at 10:02, because it's Luke chapter 10, verse 2, we stop what we're doing. And we take about 30 seconds to pray to the Lord of the harvest to send forth workers into the harvest field. Here I am, it's my very first time to be with you. And interestingly enough, I'm thinking about what would I say to you if it was the last time I was speaking to you. Now, why would I do that? And the reason why I would do that is, think about this. Many, many years ago, Jesus was speaking to his followers for the very last time. I want you to think about this. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the Great Commission. Okay? Now, I don't want you to just think about what Jesus said. I want you to think about when Jesus said it. Now, I want you to think about this. What would you say to your loved ones if you knew that you were going to be speaking to them for the very last time? Now, all of you might be saying different things to your loved ones, but I promise this would be the common thread. You would be sharing with them what is most important to you. And out of all the things that Jesus could have said to his disciples, he said, "Go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey everything that I've commanded you. And remember, I'm with you always, even to the very end of the age." One of the things that I think is interesting to me is the lack of interest there is to really encourage young people to go into all the world and preach the gospel. And I think that that's something that needs to change. A few years ago, I was in the airport at DFW. I just arrived at the airport from an international trip. And as I was there and I'm getting ready, I'm really close to my turn to go through customs, and they just stopped everybody. And as they stopped everybody, a flight of all of our military personnel had just arrived, and they stopped everything so that they could begin to walk through and cut in line in front of all of us. And you know what happened? Everybody began to clap. Everybody began to applaud. And I began to clap. And I began to applaud. And now while I was doing that, I also began to think about this. What would it look like if the church clapped and applauded for young men and women who are willing to step up and step out and go into all the world and preach the gospel? It's a need that we have. And one of the things that is amazing to me about this ministry is that we have young men and women who are willing to go into all the world and share the gospel. These young men and women, they started with us back in August, and they are now in what we call mission term, and they have been assigned their different mission points. So around the middle of May, they're going to begin leaving Lubbock, and they're going to arrive to their different mission points. And they're going to be working in places like Apaxco, Mexico, Arlington, Texas, Baguio City, Philippines, Brownwood, Texas, Grants Pass, Oregon, Jalpasoa, Brazil, Leicester, England, Mexico City, Mexico, Monrovia, Liberia, Tacoma, Washington, Taronga, New Zealand, and Tyler, Texas. That's where these young men are working, as well as our aimers who are already on the field as well. But I want you to think about this, that as we have 32 young men and women who are going to their fields, I want you to think about what does that look like in comparison to a world of 8 billion people. 8 billion people. It's a fraction. It's not even, it doesn't even register when you think about how large this world is. And we had the blessing this last week to be in Gatlinburg at Winterfest, and the theme this year was Acts. And Jeff did an amazing job. They went old school, and they had a chalkboard that went around along the whole wall, and they just started with the story of Acts. And Jesus says something very interesting in Acts chapter 1, verse 9. He says, "You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria, and then to the ends of the world." And as we know, Acts has a lot of stories in it, but really Acts tells one story, right? And as you go into the story, where does the church begin? It begins in Jerusalem, right? And then as you move on, Stephen is martyred, but that caused a persecution. And where does the gospel go? It goes to Judea and Samaria. And then you move on in the story, and Paul appeals to Caesar, and then the gospel goes to the whole world. And in that last week, there was this giant billboard that said Acts. And we were thinking about Acts, and then in the very last session that Jeff led us in, all of a sudden you see these two letters point up and begin to rise up on the wall, and it's R-E. And what he was suggesting us to do is let's re-Acts. Let's do it again. What would it look like if we had the energy and the time put in to investing, and especially in young people, to say, let's do it again? I had an instructor, his name was Richard Rogers. He's gone to be with the Lord now, but he had this statement when we would go through the book of Acts. He said, if we say what they said and we do what they did, we'll get what they got. And maybe the thing is, maybe we're not saying what they said, and maybe we're not doing what they did. But we have an amazing opportunity to re-Acts. We're getting ready to have a song come up. We're going to lead in this song, but as this song is led, the flags are going to go out. And that's just a reminder for us as we think about going in this world to preach the gospel, that Jesus never intended for us to stay in the same place, that he wants us to go into all the world. And these flags will march out as a reminder to us that we are to go. So let's come up and sing that song.
You will please stand. We're going to sing a song. It's a little bit older song, but you should know it.